Trump's removal from the ballot in Colorado, that decision just came down from the Supreme Court this morning, and it's kind of a mess. So they essentially ruled that no one state can remove a federal officer running for federal office. It has to be that those states can only remove people if they're running for state office. That's not the problem. I think that most people believed that that was going to be the case. The problem in this particular instance arises from their other part of the decision that they came down with. So for those of you that don't know or just want a refresher, Section 3 essentially says that anybody that's committed an insurrection, or helped someone that's committed an insurrection cannot run for office, period. And one of the things that it says at the end of that is that the Congress has the ability to restore that person's right with 2/3 vote. The Supreme Court ruled that that section is not what's called self-executing, meaning it needs accompanying congressional legislation for enforcement. That creates an enormous problem, though. Essentially, they're saying that Section 5 of the 14th Amendment states that they can create accompanying legislation to enforce Section 14, and that they have to do that in this instance. The problem is, unless Congress acts, people committing insurrection aren't inherently barred from running for office, unless it already falls under a different law that has been created by Congress to remove people from the ballot. So, in this instance, it creates a huge issue, because even if Congress acts, a party that's in favor of those insurrectionists running, in order to get around that 2/3 requirement, can simply undo the legislation that was the enforcement mechanism, meaning Section 3 doesn't have any use anymore. And I think that's the larger thing. It's to the point where Amy Coney Barrett even's like, we should not be addressing this issue, as well as a couple other judges dissented in that regard. But the problem is that if Section 3 is not self-executing, essentially it has no meaning. They've rendered Section 3 of the 14th Amendment completely useless, which is wild to me that they would do that, especially because that was congressionally enacted over 150 years ago. But I think even more telling is the clear hypocritical distinction that the court has not found a way to navigate, which is that for purposes of abortion, the Supreme Court has ruled that the 14th Amendment and the states in that regard, that the states have the right. And in this regard, they have ruled that, in fact, the states do not have the right, using the same exact amendment. So, number one, that's hypocritical. But so they haven't drawn a good distinction on that. But the other issue in this, and like I said, is that the Supreme Court has essentially rendered Section 3 of the 14th Amendment useless unless Congress acts. And I think that in this particular instance, my belief system about this is it is disturbing. You've watched the Supreme Court as they've run to the defense and offered Trump an immunity hearing 6 weeks in advance. So it's going to be 2.5 months before we get a ruling on that, effectively making the January 6th case not happen before the election. And you've watched them undermine Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And in an attempt to be non-political, they've become political. With regards to the immunity case, they've effectively given him immunity so that he can run without any repercussions of it. And I truly thought that, maybe this was naive of me, that the Supreme Court would be far more interested in protecting the Constitution and protecting our democracy and allowing this safeguard to have some mechanism of use against someone that wants to overthrow the government. But Republicans, in their infinite wisdom, I guess, even down to the more moderate Bush Republicans, do not care. They are fully willing to allow an orange man in a cheap suit to overthrow the United States government at will. I think America lost today.